Hello everyone, welcome to the first video of The Art of Code. In this video series, we'll be going over the very bare bone basics of code and getting you started on your first program as soon as possible. A gentle reminder is that you will still have to do some research and homework on learning the respective code that you would like to respective language, but this is just going to give a very short overview and just to explain and introduce some concepts which are applicable across all forms of coding languages. Without further ado, let's begin. So over here I have my trusty C++ IDE, because C++ is the first language that I learned, and I think it's a great starting language due to its very rigorous syntax. And I'll be using various languages throughout this video series to discuss various things, because then I think that gives a good exposure and a fair representation to all languages. So today will be C++, the next one will be whatever, we'll see what language I think will be best suited for that role. Today's video, as the name suggests, will be on variables. So what are variables? In a scientific experiment, we often think of variables as things we change, and that is true to some extent. In coding, we do change variables quite often, but in coding, variables refers to something which is more like a placeholder. So what do I mean by that? For instance, if we think of our everyday objects, over here I have some objects such as a pen knife, an Arduino Uno, and a USB-C cable. So we know these objects by their name because each of them have a name, and we associate the name with some value or some meaning that we place to these objects. So if I say, hi, I have a pen knife, that kind of gives you some meaning, and I don't think I need to explain what a pen knife is, but there is definitely some association, and that's similar in code. So going back to my example over here, we can give a name to basically anything, and that's all variables is about. It's giving names to meaning or things with meaning. So for instance, let's say I say my name is Ethan. I am essentially giving this value over here, which is a string. More on that later in later videos, but I'm essentially giving it a name. So now if I were to say, alright, I'm going to reference this name as somewhat like a placeholder for the original value. Now if I were to say print my name into the console, and doing so essentially will basically allows me to substitute out the value as a placeholder. So I think that's a bit what's the word? It's a bit difficult to explain, but as you can see here, essentially when I call name, it essentially goes back, looks at where name was defined, and then basically just substitutes it as a value. So it's like literally like your actual name in real life. If someone calls your name, people actually know what to expect, and they kind of reference you as a person and stuff like that. I don't want to go into that now. And yeah, so that's exactly what variables are. Another interesting thing and important thing about variables is that in a lot of cases, you must declare a variable before you can call it. That is something which sounds pretty obvious. For instance, we can't expect somebody to know somebody else if we haven't introduced them to the other person yet, because that's just kind of like logic. I wouldn't know what to say. So if we were to move this behind, or should I say after, when we actually call the variable, it simply wouldn't work. So if I press run, okay, and then there we go, errors exist because we have attempted to call a name before it's even defined, and that's something must be taken note of, because as we will do in our next video, I'll be discussing the procedural aspect of programming, how everything runs from top to bottom, line 1 to line n, and therefore in most cases, not all, declaring constants, declaring variables at the start is extremely important. So that brings us to this end of this very short bite-sized video on variables. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you next time.